of the truth that impacts.
Get ready for an outstanding entertainment program. The Jimmy Dore Show.
Was there an Eve, or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got what we needed when the sun shone down on the Garden of Eden.
Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia, Solartopia, Solartopia. Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia all over God's green world?
Well, we bit that apple and the garden was lost, and so we had to work to pay the cost. And so we went digging into the ground and started to burn many things we found.
Oh, yeah.
Don't you know we're gonna
Started to burn too many things we found. That's the divine Dar Williams singing with the legendary Pete Seeger and David Burns, who wrote the words to that song, except for one, Solartopia, which I wrote. And that song is on the Grammy-winning album Tomorrow's Children by Appleseed Records. We're here for another Solartopia Green Power and Wellness Show, and we got a really unique show today. We're going to be talking about two of our legendary ancestors here in the United States of America, Sally Hemings and her beau, Thomas Jefferson. It's a long, detailed, and amazing story, and we are honored to have a descendant of Tom and Sally, EVELIA Jones, speaking to us from Los Angeles. EVELIA, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. I can hear you perfectly. I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
we will
I
also
do.
be joined
Okay,
by
great.
Ed Rampell. Ed Rampell, are you with us?
I'm here, Harvey. I can hear EVELIA Jones well, but it's hard for me to hear you. Can you have your volume boosted, please?
No, you're going to be, you sound a little distant as well, so we're going to have to make do with what we got. We'll do our best. And it's a pleasure to have you on, Ed Rampell. You are a reviewer and a very prolific writer, and it's an honor to have you with us. And Bob Fitrakis, my longtime co-conspirator, are you on the phone?
I'm here, Harvey.
All right, Bob. So we are very good. Bob Fitrakis, one of the great experts and attorneys in many, many fields, but most importantly at this point, election protection. And we're going to talk to our heart's content here about Tom Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And then when we run out of steam, we're going to go and talk about election protection. But Bob, being a political science professor of many, many years, is also going to have much to say, I'm sure, about Tom and Sally. So what brings us to this crossroads is that EVELIA Jones and I co-authored a piece. EVELIA was the primary writer that appeared in the Los Angeles Times op-ed section, arguing that Thomas Jefferson, our third president of the United States, had a first lady, but she was not the woman that the White House and mainstream historians refer to as the third first lady of the United States. That would have been Martha Wayles Skelton Jefferson, Tom Jefferson's first wife, who was white, the daughter of a slave owner. But in fact, our third first lady should be recognized as Sally Hemings. Now, many Americans have come to know a bit about Sally Hemings, but EVELIA, you are her progeny. And I would be honored if you would tell us what you feel about this whole thing, about whether Sally Hemings, who she was, please, and why she should be the third, recognized as the third first lady of the United States.
Oh, boy, I get to start. Okay, well, thanks for having me on. And, I have always known that my grandmother was a Hemings. It didn't mean much to me in my infancy, but as I would return from Mississippi, where I lived as a child, where I was born, with my father, whose name was Paul Lawrence Dunbar Arthur Pryor Jones, as we would go as a family to Lynchburg every winter, I began to question, very young, precocious even, Daddy, Mama, how come Grandma has a big house and she doesn't work. Well, I was very conscious of the work ethic, and my parents were hardworking professors, and at a historically black college called Jackson State. At any rate, to get to the Sally Hemings connection, going to Lynchburg, Virginia to visit my grandmother every winter from the age of 3, I was always curious. Who or how did non-working black people, and we called them Negroes in those days, I'm not ashamed to say, it's just the word, how did these people get to live in this big place? One day, after a serious slap in the mouth, which is what it took, I understood that we were a part of a family, the Hemings family. My grandmother, who was uneducated formally, who was named Nanny Hemings. She was married to a Napoleon Jones. Nanny Hemings, tall, light-browned, the mother of 12 children by the time I met her.
Oh, my God.
Lived in a 3-story place in Lynchburg, Virginia, no bills to my knowledge. And I discovered this comes from the Hemings legacy, lineage, and foundation. That didn't make much sense to a baby. But here's how we jump forward. Maybe 30 years ago, I got some interest in researching that to see just, how true is this? And, a lot of this has been very curious for many years. Is this true? Is that possible? Would a great icon like Thomas Jefferson ever get that serious with a woman of color? Well, let me take the first step here. Woman of color, wow. There's some rule, and I bet you all know it better than I do, about how much brown paper coloring you need, especially when it comes to voting or something. There's some old story about that. She wasn't very colored, if you will, in my opinion. She was from a slave lineage, yes, and that's very clear from the history. But she did not appear to be much more than a very stunningly beautiful woman, from all the accounts I know. She probably was a very alluring, seductive type of person. I feel that. Because how else does any individual become attracted beyond description to one person? She had allegedly many children with this man we call Thomas Jefferson. But Sally would be the descendant, the ancestor, of my grandmother. And we would trace that with DNA. Many things would happen. I had some pretty aggressive aunts. I told you my grandmother had 12 children. Of the aunts, of which there were 6, they all wanted to be Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson and Monticello related. That's a big deal in Virginia. But the Daughters of the American Revolution stopped that at every turn. So most of them became tired of it. One, who is still alive today, never gave up. Okay, that's another story. This is how I come about knowing and believing and having faith in the fact from an oral history that I am related to Sally. I've had a trace since then, and as close as we can get, there's no discrepancy that, we are from that very same family. Now, when you get to which brother or sister or whom, that becomes very, very interesting. But there are several people involved in tracing that every day. As I speak, they are trying to get closer and closer to just whom, just when, just how. Is Nanny Hemings of Lynchburg, Virginia, related to Sally Hemings? of the Monticello Thomas Jefferson history. Now, I'll stop.
And to you,
I can talk.
And to you, Avelia Jones, because you were raised in Mississippi.
I was.
Correct?
Yeah.
And then you moved to Los Angeles. Not
first, last. This is my last move. Yeah, but I end up in Los Angeles in my adult life, yes.
And it's my understanding that there is quite a contingent of Jefferson Hemings descendants here in Los Angeles. Is that correct?
Well, when you say quite, that tells me a great number of them, but I know that there are a few for sure.
Right.
Recorded, should we say, people who will admit that there's some connection that they know of, yeah.
And we know that Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, as best I can tell, had 3 children while Thomas Jefferson was president, which is more children than any other president fathered while in the White House. By factor of 3, Jack Kennedy had 1. I think there may have been one other president that had a child. No one else had 3. And ironically, as best I can tell, and I've done a lot of research on this, and the records are not all in agreement.
Right.
As best we can tell, Tom and Sally had 8 children, either 4 or 5 of whom lived full adult lives.
Yeah, 2 were known to be stillborn, to my knowledge.
Yeah, there were.
Yeah, so you're right. That's what I read too.
And right, she lost either 3 or 4, and the one that's most intriguing to me is that Sally was 17 or thereabouts, and Tom was 47 or thereabouts when they were in Paris in the late 1780s.
Yeah.
And Sally turned up pregnant, and Tom, she basically bargained with Tom because she could have stayed in France and been a free woman, along with her brother, who Tom brought over to Paris to teach how to cook and become a French chef at Monticello.
Yes.
So Tom and Sally had a bargaining, and Sally forced him to agree to free her children and to treat her as a servant as opposed to a slave when they came back to Monticello.
Yeah,
so
something like that.
She was pregnant on the voyage back, and she came home to Monticello and birthed a boy who was named Tom. And here's where it gets weird, because one of the other Jefferson Hemings children said that young Tom died shortly thereafter, but there are other records that said that Tom, Thomas Jr., the first Hemings Jefferson child, was actually moved to another plantation.
Yes.
According to James Callender, who wrote about this in 1802, the boy looked so much like his father that, except he was black, that Tom felt compelled to move him to a plantation owned by the Woodson family.
Yeah.
And then the records show that there was a Thomas Woodson who came to Circleville, Ohio, and who's listed on the census in the 1870s as being a black man. This man is the son of Thomas Jefferson. And this Thomas Woodson, apparently, by some accounts, not only didn't die young, but wound up having 11 children, 2 of whom were killed in the Civil War trying to free slaves.
Yeah.
So it's really very, very interesting. And then, Avelia, your relative here in Los Angeles, where I am today, named Frederick Madison Roberts, I believe, became the first black man elected to the California Assembly and served 16 years. He was elected in 1916 from here in Los Angeles and became a close personal friend of Earl Warren, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So it really gets interesting, and you are part of an amazing heritage, and I'm so proud to have been able to be a part of the LA Times op-ed. I hope people will Google EVELIA JONES, Los Angeles Times, Sally Hemings, and look at this op-ed.
If I could say something right there, Harvey,
please.
It's also interesting to me that of all the Hemings-related, therefore Jefferson-related offspring I have ever been in touch with in any kind of way, some things always seem to bear the same strain, the same thread, which is creative, the inventive, and when I say creative, artists. Oh, my goodness. People who are good with their hands, who are good with the soil, the earth. People who, and there's no good explanation for it, except, is that lineage? Is that bloodline? What is that? And well, make good careers, lucrative in some cases, on it. I think that reeks a lot of Thomas Jefferson to me.
Well, if I got his name right, Frederick
something?
Madison Roberts was a very powerful figure here in Los Angeles. And he must have progeny all over the place.
Yeah.
And I got to say, I'm going to turn to Ed and Bob in a minute, but
can I interject
I just had a
here?
classic instance here. I was talking with a mutual friend about this, just here in L.A., and out of the blue, she told me that she was married to a descendant of Tom and Sally for 4 years, way back in the 70s.
Uh-huh.
And, they've separated. She's lost track of him, but, it's just kind of clearly out of the blue. You got to be kidding me, Ed Rampell, you are a great writer and a reviewer. I'm sorry, there is a technical difficulty sometimes when I have three people on the show. There's nothing I can do about my volume control or yours. So if you can, I will speak loud a bit. You have your own take on this, I know, as a brilliant writer and reviewer. Tell us what your take is on this whole Tom Jefferson, Sally Hemings controversy.
Well, I hope that you can hear me.
I can, yes.
Last August, EVELIA appeared in a live stage production at the End of the Left Coast Forum as Sally Hemings. And, of course, you, Harvey, portrayed your hero, Eugene Debs. And in researching the script, which I wrote, I adapted Madison Hemings' memoir, which was published 1873 in Ohio's, not the Free Press, but Ohio's Pike County Republican. And he, at the time, in 1873, Jefferson's son Madison reviewed the family lineage. And we adapted this for the play, and in it, Madison Hemings wrote that to induce Sally, when she and Jefferson were in France, to return to Monticello, Tom promised Sally extraordinary privileges and made a solemn pledge that my children should be freed at the age of 21. And Madison goes on to write that provision was made in the will of Thomas that they should be free, that is, the children, when they arrived at the age of 21 years. They had all passed that period when Jefferson died, but Eston, and he was given the remainder of his time shortly after. And Eston and Madison rented a house after Jefferson died, and Sally left Monticello, and she lived with her and Thomas's son, that is Eston and Madison, until 1835. So apparently Jefferson did make a promise to free Sally's children. He honored that promise, apparently, according to Madison. And Sally was able to leave Monticello to live with them, but it's not exactly clear whether or not Jefferson formally made provisions to free her. There were rules in different southern states where slavery was practiced that regarding manumission, which meant the emancipation of slaves, that they would have to leave that state. And one does not know, I don't know, I should say, whether or not that played a role in his decision regarding whether or not to free the woman who was literally his wife, because if that law applied to Virginia at the time, they would have had to be like Donald and Melania and live separately. And he wanted to live with his wife, unlike Melania apparently doesn't really want to live with her spouse. But Thomas and Sally, who were together about 30 years, wanted apparently to stay together. And a couple of other things. Thomas appeared at some point in his life. He was literally the most famous man in the world because he wrote the Declaration of Independence and went on to become president of the new republic. And there are no strong rumors. There is no proof that, other than Martha and then Martha's half sister Sally, there's no proof, DNA evidence that I'm aware of, that Jefferson had any other children. Carry on.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So, Ed Rampell, thank you. That excellent.
Yeah.
Let me. Since I'm sitting in front of my computer, I was a little muddled. The gentleman who came to L.A. and became the first black man elected to the California Assembly was named Frederick Madison Roberts. Now,
yes.
He was born in Chillicothe, Ohio, which is Bob Fitrakis well knows as not far from Columbus, and which also, by the way, happens to be the birthplace of the great Chief Tecumseh. Now, Frederick Madison Roberts was the son of one of the children, actually must have been the grandson of Tom and Sally, because one of the other children of Tom and Sally did move to Ohio, and then he had Frederick Madison Roberts in Ohio. And then Frederick Madison Roberts was born in 1879. When he was 6, his family moved to L.A. He became the first black kid to graduate from Los Angeles High School. And then in 1918, he was, as a Republican, he was elected to the California House. He actually became the first black person on the entire West Coast elected to a public office. And he was in the Assembly for 16 years and finally died in Boyle Heights in L.A. in 1952. And he only had one child named Gloria Roberts. But there must be other progeny in Los Angeles who are related. Your cousins, EVELIA.
Yes.
Maybe they.
Yeah. I actually do have a cousin who's in California, in Garden Grove. A physician, actually. And but look, I wanted to say something too before it got too far away.
Please.
Yeah. The reason I say who knows is because, for me, the way I became conscious of, yeah, it's true. Yes, this is a fact about your relationship to Sally Hemings. Is through the Monticello group called Getting Word. And they send a newsletter, all kinds of communications as to where families are gathering all across the country, wherever they may be, and try to help them validate or find some proof that they are related to Sally Hemings. And again, boy, did DNA make a difference not too long ago.
Really?
Yeah,
sure did.
But until that time, all of us were floundering. Like, I've got this house, or I had this little artifact or something, but no one could actually prove a thing until recently.
Right.
But that's how I know so much, is that they got my father before he died and brought him to Monticello 2 or 3 times to question him. A great board of people, whose names I still have, did a great research at one time. It must have been at least 15 years ago now. to see if they could get some of the last remaining people to say something about what they remember. It's an oral history, actually. Yeah, so I had to throw that in before it was too late because...
No, it's good. Well, it's good we have a full hour here because this is one of the most fascinating stories in all of American history. Bob Fitrakis, as a political scientist and someone not far from Chillicothe, have you ever run into anybody in central Ohio that claimed to be a descendant of Tom and Sally?
Oh, there's actually a well-known woman here, Shay Banks Young, who's well established in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Really? So, she's part of the association. She did that discussion in Black and a White back a little while ago. But I've always been, the question to me is, often not talked about, is the fact that Sally and Jefferson's first wife were half-sisters.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that's truly amazing. Well, let me lay this out a bit for you, Bob and Ed and Avelia. The reason I got into this, I was teaching a class in cultural and ethnic diversity at Capital University in Central Ohio, where Bob has also taught. And as part of the class, I had my students, as an exercise, explain their cultural and ethnic origins. And so when I got my roster one year, it was about 10, 12 years ago, I noticed I had a student named Hadassah, and I thought, oh, my God, I finally have a Jewish student. So it turns out she's a Jehovah's Witness and an African-American. Yeah. And she gave she had very interesting immediate family history. And then at the end of her talk, she said, and by the way, I'm a descendant of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. The poor girl, I just grilled her for a half hour after that. I'd never heard of it, actually, even though I'm a historian. And so I did a lot of research. And, Avelia, you mentioned DNA. So here's the way it went. Tom, and Bob, you mentioned that Sally was the half-sister of Tom's first wife. So here's the basic exposition. A black woman was taken from Africa, and she was dragged over on a slave ship. And she was raped by the captain, whose name was Hemings. She had a daughter. And when she came to America, and she was bought by a slave owner named John Wayles, who was Tom Jefferson's neighbor. And then that daughter became, John Wayles had 3 white wives, all of whom died. And then that daughter became John Wales's lover. And they had 6 children, the youngest of whom was named Sarah, which apparently became Sally. And meanwhile, John had another daughter one of the previous marriages, White, named Martha. Martha married a guy named Skelton. He died, and then she married Tom Jefferson. And then they had a child when they were born who was also named Martha. And Martha and Sally were about the same age. Yeah. Sally was born about a year after Tom and Martha were married. But Sally was technically Martha Hemings' half-sister because she was sired by John Wayles, the slave owner. So Sally now also was third-generation American, third-generation white. And when Tom went to Tom and Martha, his white wife, had 3 or more children, all of whom died except for their first 2 daughters. The oldest one was named Martha, and there was a younger one named Polly or Maria. Tom when Tom's white wife died, he was apparently quite heartbroken, and partly to let him recover, the Congress, although it was for other good reason, the Congress sent Tom to Paris to succeed Benjamin Franklin as our ambassador to Paris. The French helped us in the American Revolution, thanks to Ben Franklin's great work of sleeping with half the women in Paris. And nonetheless, he persuaded the King of France to come on our side. And really we would not have won the revolution had that not happened. Tom was actually a very good choice to succeed Ben Franklin. He went over there with his first daughter, Martha, and she actually went into a convent while they were in Paris. Then Tom sent for his second daughter, Maria, who's, 3-4 years younger, and for Sally Hemings to be her nanny and to be a housekeeper while they were in Paris. So Sally arrives with the second daughter, Maria, in the late 1780s, and she's taking care, and she arrives when she's 13 or 14, and when she's 17, she becomes pregnant with Tom. And I cannot imagine the dynamic between Tom and his two daughters, his two white daughters, and Sally when Sally turns up pregnant. I mean, somebody should write a soap opera about this. And I have the perfect name for what it should be called. It should be called The Jeffersons. Sorry. Okay, so at any rate, Sally is pregnant with Tom. He's got his two white daughters there in Paris, and it's time for him to come home. And so, as mentioned, as Ed talked about, there was a negotiation between Sally and Tom, and Sally's brother was also there. Tom had brought him over, as I mentioned, to learn French cooking. So, because he wanted to bring him back to Paris, back to Monticello, and have a French cook. So, this negotiation goes on. Apparently, Sally comes back to the United States, rides, 3 months on the ship back to America while pregnant. I mean, the poor girl. She's 17 years old. She's pregnant by her owner. She's on the ship with the owner's daughters, who are her half-sisters. I can't even imagine what that must have been like. And her brother's on the boat because Tom brings him back to cook at Monticello. They get back to Monticello, and which I have been to, by the way, and that's the first thing they tell you when you take a tour, is that it's Monticello, not Monticello, which means small hill in Italian.
Yes.
So Sally sets up with Tom. She has a boy. Now, there's some controversy, as I mentioned. Did the boy live or not? His name was Tom. I mean, come on, I'm looking online here at a document about Thomas C. Woodson. Now, one of the Jefferson children later on in his memoir says that Tom Jr. died at a very early age. But I'm looking, and the first reportage of this whole affair was done by a guy named James Callender, and there's a whole story there. I won't go into it now. But James Callender in 1802 writes a story that was circulated nationally that says, hey, everybody, President Jefferson has a brood here of children with his black slave, and the first one's name is Tom, and he looks just like his father, and he was sent to a nearby estate, which was owned by the Woodson family. Now, the other account is that this kid died, very young. But according to this, and I'm looking at this from the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, Thomas C. Woodson, born around 1790, which would be exactly right, lived till 1879, for God's sakes. After his father died, he was sent to the Woodson estate about 30 miles from Monticello, and around 1820, actually before Tom died, moved to, but when he would have been 30 by then, moved to Chillicothe, which is outside of Columbus, and had a farm, was a very successful farmer, raised a family of 11 children, many of whom became ministers or educators.
Yeah.
And then I remember seeing a story about the census in Chillicothe referring to Thomas C. Woodson as a son of Tom and Sally. And I saw some very detailed information, which I mentioned, that said that 2 of his kids died fighting to free the slaves. And as part of the Underground Railroad.
Harvey.
Yeah.
Can I mention something too? Since I'm kind of representing.
No. Please go right ahead.
The line of slave Sally. The thing, servant Sally. Here's what I want to mention. First of all, if you come from a slave line or if you have worked the fields for any plantation owner, whether he be your lover, your husband, your brother, whatever, if you are working the land anywhere, you are closer to what heals, what strengthens. And, this is something that, forgive me for being racial here, a lot of people who have a little money or a little something don't understand. I won't say it's all white, but black folk are more familiar, more recently, with what that could be like. I don't care. Now, if you are also appearing to be white, which has always been a big deal, are you passing? That's one term. Are you like white? That's another term. There are a lot of little isms that we've known about for generations and generations. First of all, Sally's traveling back and forth on a boat. I bet you she survived a little better than most for a number of reasons. One, leaning to her basic knowledge of the land, things that heal, that don't heal. These are things you learn when you don't grow up in the big house. Exactly. I see that from Mulberry Row in Monticello, that they respect and show who these many, 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 many people were, descendant of Thomas Jefferson and Sally, who, never saw the inside of Monticello unless it was some special occasion. Unlike Sally, unlike her children. So that's one little thing. I don't know if I'm speaking it clearly, but we always overlook. Even recently, about a year ago, someone got me, before you, Harvey, and before Ed, got me to speak about Sally Hemings. And, oh, my God, the first thing that happened was someone called, I've never heard of, got my phone number and called for days in a row to say, "You liar. How can you claim to be related to one of the founding fathers of the United States of America?" Well, my reaction to that was, you poor thing, you. That in your whiteness, you have never, ever considered that everybody you know that you think are white, look at yourself, might not be white by the old law. Mm-hmm. It's something we do with skin color and hair texture. But it has affected, since the days of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, how people react to anything like that. They will outright deny. And even the very whitest of the blacks get away with it, or whites accept it, because they say there's no indication here that this is a black person. The advantages are grand, right, if you look white. So I think in Sally's case, she passed the bar over and over and over. The pictures you see in Hollywood with the movies and stuff, they pick brown-skinned girls who are attractive, by some descriptions. Yeah, Hollywood style. I don't see a real picture of Sally Hemings.
There's one woodcut I've seen.
Yeah.
That she looks a lot like Halle Berry. I mean, she's really gorgeous.
Well, yeah, but Halle Berry's half white as well.
EVELIA recently met Sandy Newton, who portrayed Sally in the movie Jefferson in Paris. And it was a very lovely, brief encounter. You could tell that from Sandy's expression that she was quite moved by meeting a descendant of Sally. And, of course, Jefferson has been portrayed in a number of productions, and this includes the 1969 musical 1776, which is being revived right now in Los Angeles at the La Mirada Theater for the Performing Arts, which is located in L.A. County. and it's going to be moving after the close of the show in La Mirada on February 3rd. It's going to move February 8th through February 10th to the Eunice and Soraya Nazarian Center for the Performing Arts, also known as the Soraya, which is located in the San Fernando Valley. And I did go to the opening night on the 12th of 1776, and of course Sally is not at all mentioned or depicted in any way in this play because it takes place when Sally was a little baby, as the title refers to it, in 1776. And but Martha is the first wife, Sally's half sister, is depicted. And when the play is about the Continental Congress deciding whether or not to break away from Great Britain. And Thomas Jefferson is tasked with writing a declaration of independence which would express the views of why the Americans want to break away from the British Crown, and this would then be voted on by members of the Second Continental Congress. But Jefferson, who is only 33 at the time, is suffering from writer's block. And the reason why is because he had promised Martha that he would leave Philadelphia and ride down to Monticello to be with his beautiful young wife. And Jefferson, who is portrayed by an actor named Caleb Shaw, has this terrible writer's block when he is unable to join Martha because he hasn't had sex for weeks. And John Adams, behind his back, connives to bring Martha up from Virginia to Pennsylvania to meet with Thomas in Philadelphia, and they have this rapturous, romantic scenes together, and apparently by finally making love with Martha, Thomas is finally able to write the Declaration of Independence. Now,
I think
the play deals with history, but it raises a lot of issues about historical accuracy because during that period of time, Martha actually never did ride up to Philadelphia.
Oh, interesting. Well, maybe that's why the term manly firmness appears in the Declaration. Bob Fitrakis, you've been following this. What do you think?
What part in particular?
Yeah, I mean,
the manly firmness.
Yeah, right.
I hope not, because we don't want to think that's the issue.
Right.
I want to think Sally was the reason because she was so amazing. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, yes. Was Sally in? No, Sally was not in 1776. No. Sally was 4 years old. Yeah, so I think Sally was born around 1772 when Martha and Tom got married. Yeah. So, but I remember that part. I saw the movie 1776, and I thought that part of it was very funny. And I guess, but you're saying it wasn't true. I mean, wasn't there a Motel 6 around the corner from Independence Hall? No, I think there is one now.
And
but
even
he
more
probably would have
interesting from the point of view of historical accuracy. And of course, we have to be generous and remember that there was no C-SPAN covering the Second Continental Congress. And by the way, there were no contemporaneous written records kept for whatever reason. Later on, people who participated wrote down their memories, etc. So it's hard to determine historical accuracy, but here, regarding Jefferson, is one of the most interesting things is that one of the members of the Continental Congress, a Southern aristocrat named Edward Rutledge, who is played by a great Broadway veteran named James Barbour, who sings, unfortunately, what is the Act Two's showstopper called Molasses to Rum. The best song, arguably, in the play is given to a slave owner. And he objects to Jefferson's Declaration of Independence as originally written because there is a clause in it that objects to slavery. Now, first of all, point of historical accuracy, I don't know whether there was a clause objecting to the slave trade or to slavery itself, which are not exactly the same thing. But
there
anyway,
was definitely Jefferson in the original Declaration of Independence blamed the king for slavery in America and described slavery, even though he was a slave owner, in very negative terms. And the Congress removed that clause from the Declaration. It's one of the many contradictions that we live with Thomas Jefferson.
demands that it be removed, and he debates Thomas Jefferson, portrayed by Caleb Shaw, in the Continental Congress, and he throws into his fellow slave owner's face. He says, "You, Thomas, you yourself own slaves." And Jefferson responds. Now, keep in mind, this was written at the time of the Black Power movement. In 1969, the play was written. And Jefferson responds, and he says, very interestingly, "I plan to free my slaves."
Yes, and he probably did. The problem is he was such a lousy manager of money that when he finally came to his end in 1826, he was bankrupt. And so I'm sure in many ways, I mean, he was such a complicated character, Tom Jefferson. He really was. You can get dizzy trying to make sense of Tom Jefferson. But I'm sure he intended to, at some point in his life, intended to free his slaves, but he did not have the financial wherewithal. It's not even clear that he freed his own kids. 2 of his children passed for white. They just slipped into white society. Well, I'm not clear, and I think there's debate about what happened to the other 2, and it's not even clear that he freed Sally. But, you know, however it happened. And when he died, Monticello went into bankruptcy. His daughter died, Patsy, or Martha, who maintained the farm while he was alive, died not long after him. And Monticello wound up being bought by a Jewish family that eventually turned it over to the state of Virginia, and then the state couldn't handle it, and they turned it over to the Fed. So it's now a federal monument. Bob Fitrakis, as an Ohioan, one of the things that Tom Jefferson did was the Northwest Ordinance, where he, when it was time to provide for new states coming into the Union, Tom Jefferson wrote the law, the Northwest Ordinance, and it forbade slavery in Ohio, what became Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So at least you and I, who lived in Central Ohio for so long, we weren't in a state that ever had slavery.
Hey, Harvey. Harvey?
Yes.
You know what? Before time runs out, some things I wanted to say, since I rarely get to be on radio with anybody, on podcasts rather. First of all, based on something I guess Ed was saying, and I want to know, is Thomas Jefferson, in a sense, attracted to Sally Hemings because he is I know this isn't what Ed said exactly, but a sex-deprived male who maybe has access to a woman, or is he attracted to a very beguiling woman, smart and attractive and strong and many other things to boot? Because to me, I've never met a man in my life, I haven't met all of them, that's for sure, who was sexually involved with the same woman through 8 children, born dead or alive, again and again and again and again. That's not sexual drive only. that's something deeper than that, because none of us who are living will say we've ever wanted to be in the company of someone purely because of a sexual thing, again and again and again, the same person.
Well, they were together. They were apparently together, Tom and Sally, from the late 1780s until Tom died in 1826, almost 40 years.
So whatever the play depicts about what drives him, whether it be true or false, the thing is, I think what really drove him is that girl was something extraordinary. And why not? And also, Thomas Jefferson, which isn't reflected very often, they talk about him as a writer and a designer of the contracts of the New Republic, but he also was someone who drew, who loved music, who was an inventor of things, objects. He made all kinds of things. And Monticello underlines that when you go there, that, oh, this man was multi-talented. And most multi-talented people also are not fixed on one thing. In other words, he may have been able to go run to Philadelphia and do some constitutional work, but he was probably in equal hurry to get back to Monticello with his land, with his life. And his life was not only the writing of the Constitution and any little parts of it. Now, based on that comment, I bet you that what the United States ought to think about, or maybe some groups of us, why isn't there some monument to those two as the first of a type?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be a good movement forward, in my opinion, to recognize her as the First Lady.
Yes, there's a lot of talk about tearing down the Confederate statues
to have a monument to both Tom and Sally.
Well, I think we've removed from some Confederate monuments, so it'd be a real positive monument. But some of the analysis asked the question, too. I mean, was he facing miscegenation laws, which included, harsh punishment, included death? So the conclusion is, if you're going to risk death and also political humiliation, there's something more at work there than sex.
When people tell me, they say, well, he was a slave owner, I said, who wasn't that had anything? I don't even understand the comparison or the issue about, well, he was a slave owner. Most people, and I won't say they were 100% white either, who had land and had to make money from that at that time, didn't own slaves. How else were they going to work the land?
Exactly. Bob Fitrakis, we're going to have you back next week, if you can, to talk about election theft, election protection. This is a fascinating hour. I wish we could go another hour. Thank you, Bob, for joining in with us. Bob is publisher at freepress.org, and we worked together for almost as long as Tom was with Sally. Ed Rampell, we're going to run out of time here. This has been magnificent. Do you want to jump in here real quick?
Yeah, real quick, that there should be a statue for Sally equal size to Thomas built under the dome of the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., where his quote, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." Let's honor Sally as the third First Lady of the United States of America, the first black First Lady of the USA.
Absolutely. And EVELIA, the last words are yours. Let's hear it.
The last words of mine are thank you so much for spreading this further and further so that people will at least understand that we, women of color, deserve a great deal more honor and respect than ever given before. And I appreciate you allowing this time to this issue. I I want to keep it going, and I want to see the monument, and I want to see more written and more people tune in and write in about their connection. It's history that's unwritten, and we got to get it written.
It's absolutely fascinating, and you know, I do want to thank the Los Angeles Times for running this op-ed that you and I wrote.
Oh yeah,
and you know, it was I think it's probably the first piece in any major media to advocate her formal standing as a first lady. And I got to say, Abby at the Times, who did a lot of the research, she posted a link back to the White House. There is a White House listing of first ladies, and Martha Wayles, you know, Skelton Jefferson, God love her, but you know, there's a whole thing on her as if she were Tom Jefferson's first lady, but she died 20 years before he became president. And also at Monticello, you know, they now have found Sally's room. When you go to Monticello, they show you a bed which nobody could ever sleep on in Tom's study, and they say that's where he slept. And I look at that thing and say, no way he slept on that bed. And they have now found the actual room adjacent to his study, which was Sally's room. And you know, clearly they were together, you know, and having a normal, as normal as a relationship can be, for decades. Yeah, and we also want to say she gave birth to more children, and all three of whom survived. You know, quite unlikely, while he was president of the United States, than any other first lady in the history of the United States. Jack and Jackie Kennedy had a child. I believe Grover Cleveland may have had a child. John Tyler had 14 children, but he had 7 before and 7 after he was president. So of all the
you know, I began my part with my entry to Virginia as a child. I would say yay to Virginia, again, for being the wildlife capital that it is of land and weather and everything. She's strong. She was strong.
Thank you so much. Sally's descendants, EVELIA Jones, Ed Rampell, BOB FITRAKIS. We'll see you next week in the Solartopia Green Power and Wellness Show.
Solartopia, 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 don't you know we're gonna